Hello, good morning or evening, wherever you are. I'm Klaus Kursawe. I'm working with Vega protocol on consensus protocols. I've been working in this area since about '98, and then just before. Is this echo normal?
No, so that echoes because you have Crowdcast open on another window.
Okay, does it work better now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, I've been working in the consensus area since '98 and then left it before it got hot. So I'm very good candidate for the Bad Timing Awards and worked a little bit on security of electricity grids. And now I'm with Vega, and what you see here is the attempt to put the entire presentation into the title. What I'm talking about is protection against front running and minor extractable value, or at least controlling them. And for us, this is important because we are building a decentralized exchange. And for an exchange, front running can actually be a pretty deadly thing. And let me turn off my camera so that you see more of the screen and less of me. I'm also happy to take questions during the talk. Just put them on the chat and not on the questions, because I can't see those when I'm screen sharing. So where does the problem come from I'm talking about? It's the price of decentralization. So we all probably love decentralized systems. But the price is a centralized system has a much easier way to protect its internals behind firewalls with audits, and we need to trust this one party, but then one party can actually protect itself reasonably well. In a decentralized system, we eliminated the trust in one party, and we all love that. But the price is we now distributed our system over the whole world, and an attacker can easily attack individual components, get to the communication in between, run a denial of service attack, and so on. And in the last 30 years, the community got pretty good at compensating part of that by making sure we have a good way to agree on the order of events, which is essentially what a blockchain does. But we have done very little work on defining what actually is a good order that we want to agree on, what do we actually want the quality of the order to be. And this has been a problem. So for centralized exchanges, it's been a problem since quite a while. There's a very nice book, Flash Boys, describing how some traders bought very fast lines. They spent millions on cutting a glass fiber line by a kilometer to shave off a microsecond, and then could turn this into a lot of money, which essentially was a tax on normal traders that they had to pay to the people that front run them. And this is now also moving into the DeFi world. There's a paper from Cornell explaining how the Flash Boys are now moving into decentralized exchanges. And we've also seen a nice Medium post, Ethereum is a dark forest. There's already bots out there that look for nice transactions they can steal. And if they see you have a nice transaction, but if they would do it, they would make money. They just bid more money than you do and essentially steal your transaction. And since they have no money, nothing to lose, they can offer the validators almost as much as they earn, so you will always lose against them. So the question is, at what time will validators make more money by selling off order than from actual validation fees, which for some chains is of course linked already? And how will this impact the acceptance by normal traders? And there is no discussion that MEV is actually a good idea. I still don't get that. So if anyone can explain to me why it's a good idea that I don't do my main business, but essentially take bribes, I'm very happy to enter that discussion. So our goal was to have an add-on for existing blockchains. So we don't want to build our own blockchain. We want to build on, in our case, Tendermint, but be flexible about the blockchain, and add a gadget that can add fairness, whatever that means at that point, and is lightweight enough for a high-speed change. And somehow my PowerPoint moves by itself. Last point is there was already a Casper protocol and the hot stuff protocol. So for the comic fans, it was time to add Wendy to the lot, and here she is. So state of the art. The problem was first identified in 1994 by Reiter and Biermann, back then at Cornell University. And their idea was causal order, which is now more known as commit and reveal. I threshold encrypt my orders, and they're only decrypted after they're scheduled. That was actually my first work in consensus protocols that we refined and implemented that definition. It is a little bit hairy since threshold crypto is very difficult to marry with staking. Back then, we assumed that one validator has one vote. If we have stakes, this is getting more complex. But also, it turns actually out this goes very nicely with fairness. So it's not competing, but fairness and causality are a very great team. They fill each other's gaps, and a fairness protocol can actually make a causal order protocol much easier to implement and much faster. There's another fairness definition just for completeness, which is more what's now known as censorship freeness, but with a guaranteed bound. So I know once I send my message, it is delivered into blockchain after a certain time. So just to make sure that the notions are a little bit clean. And the other way this is currently handled is for leader-based protocols to switch leaders very fast. Tendermint does this, Hotstuff does this. Every round has a different leader, and we then try to protect this one leader from a denial of service attack and then hope that no external party can exploit it. And if I have a bad leader, then the influence is sort of limited because it will be out pretty soon. And there's parallel work, which goes relatively close to what we are doing from Cornell that was also published this year. And I recommend reading that paper. I don't have time to get into this in more detail. So the setup and model, it's pretty much the standard model. We assume we have an underlying blockchain. We reuse the timing model and the corruption model of this blockchain. So Wendy usually doesn't need to impose additional assumptions. The one thing that is important here, we do assume we have a known set of validators, so we can't be completely open permissionless in the way that Bitcoin is, that everybody can just say, I'm a validator for the next 5 minutes and then I stop validating. If we don't have this at the moment, we don't even know how to define fairness. So if we have a network like Bitcoin or original Ethereum, then we need Wendy to work on a subset of validators, just like Casper does for finality already. Yeah, and again, we don't do our blockchain, we do an add-on, and our goal is to be able to work with as many blockchains as possible. Now, defining fairness, our first attempt was the pretty straightforward definition that trader sends transactions to all validators, and if all validators see transaction A before B, then A should be scheduled before B, which is pretty much the minimum fairness you would want to achieve. Unfortunately, we can show that we can get a situation in this case where we are undecidable. And I put this into this table. So if I have those 4 transactions and those 4 validators in these orders, it's undecidable which transaction has to go first because we don't know which of the validators may be dishonest. And it may even be undecidable if we are undecidable if you have an asynchronous network. So the second best definition, block order fairness. If all honest validators see A before B, then A is scheduled in the same or an earlier block. And then we have a post protocol that sorts out the blocks internally. And most of the time, which means if we have a decidable setting, then we also get normal fairness. Otherwise, we have a couple of transactions, so we just need to toss a coin or generally leave it to higher level applications what to do if they can't decide who comes first. Now, unfortunately, even the block order fairness gets us into trouble. I can take several of these blocks I used before and link them together, and there's no limit on how much I can link them. So I can't guarantee termination. There's a setting where I can have an infinitely long block. Now, ways out, we can try to build a new model. The level of control an adversary needs to break block order fairness is very, very high. So we don't expect that to even ever see this in practice. We can formalize this at random points, the network insert delivery errors, so we don't have an adversary with complete control. Works pretty nice, but it's a little bit unsatisfying. Pragmatism, we just run the protocol. If the order gets too big, we cut off at a random time and say, well, this improbable event happened, so now one guy is treated unfair, but you can't control whom. What we did is we also found a new definition of fairness, which is timed fairness, which is a little bit weaker than block order fairness, but still satisfactory. And the protocol then does a hybrid of block order and timed fairness. So we run block order until we run into trouble, which generally never should happen. And if we do, then we run the timed fairness protocol to resolve the trouble, and then we'll go back to block order. So what Wendy in the end is a 3-layer protocol. We have the block order fairness protocol in the center, which is always running in normal cases. We do try order fairness wherever that's mathematically possible. So if we have a decidable set, then a post protocol adds orders in the blocks. And we have a timed fairness protocol as a fallback. If we get stuck and have a too long block, that one is resolved to break the undecidability chain, and then we go back to block order fairness. And we did run this in simulations and actually never saw a case if I have a realistic network simulation where we don't have order fairness. And the infinitely long block is actually even in a simulation where you control the entire network. It's pretty hard to achieve that. The next version of Wendy, which is actually the one we are about to implement, we went one step further and said, if we are switching between different fairness definitions anyhow, why not go all the way and allow different definitions? And it's essentially allow a blockchain or even a market on a blockchain to switch between definitions. So if you want a model like Ethereum that you can pay for preference, we can also implement this in Wendy, but now it's controlled. So we can say there's a maximum price and somebody cannot be outbid forever. And we can try to kill snipers that just try to steal transactions. So we're now free to do all kinds of fairness definitions. If a market wants it, then Wendy can now implement it because we can switch between definitions anyhow. So how the protocol works, dissemination, our first part, and that's the one that costs us the most overhead. Every validator that sees a transaction needs to send it to all other validators, or in an optimized version, at least to future leaders. It's a simple multicast, so it's just one message sent to everybody. And that way assures that in the end, the leader has an overview on how other people perceived the order of events. We have blockchain receive, so that's the underlying blockchain that can essentially take finished transactions out. And the core of the protocol is compute the blocking sets. So if a transaction is blocked by another one, and I come to this in the next slide. So if I cannot schedule this transaction yet because I don't know how to do so fairly, then that transaction is held back. And all the others can still go through and then can be picked up by the blockchain on the next point, but those transactions have to wait. And there's essentially two rules. So our transaction is absolutely blocked if given the current knowledge. It's possible that as a currently unknown transaction that gets precedent. So in block order fairness, that happens if I have seen too few votes. So I still can have a large number of validators say, oh, I saw another one before that. Those transactions are not allowed to go into the next block. And then I have block by, which essentially says, given the current knowledge, a known and undelivered transaction, a known but undelivered transaction can still take precedence. So that means if a transaction is blocked by another, then it has to go in the same block as the other. So if the other one is blocked, then they both are blocked and cannot go into the next block. And this is essentially the two rules we need to implement. And this is the whole definition of where fairness comes into. So if you switch the fairness definition, we switch that. Multiple fairness definitions, I mentioned that already. So the one thing we have is transaction labels. If I have a big blockchain like Ethereum, not everybody on there needs to be fair with respect to each other. If one guy is playing CryptoKitties, if they still were on Ethereum, and some other people are trading gold, they don't need relative fairness to each other. So we can put transaction labels that only transactions that relate to each other are also treated fairly with respect to each other. And also, if we think about Vega, we have different markets. So also we don't need fairness of an Australian sheep farmer betting on the weather in Australia and someone in New York trading oil. And that also speeds up things because now I can only be blocked by transactions that are absolutely relevant to me. And as I mentioned already, fairness switching, so we can have the hybrid protocol, but we can also react to market conditions. So if we have a big sale off, that we switch to a different definition of fairness than we would have otherwise. Now, performance and measurements, we actually did implement it on a simulated blockchain and a simulated network. So for now, Wendy is not running on a real blockchain, but a simulated one that makes it easier to do measurements. So for latency, Wendy runs completely in parallel to the blockchain. So the blockchain never needs to wait for Wendy. There is a little bit of communication overhead, of course, and some transactions will be delayed to later blocks. So some transactions that pass through Wendy and not pass to the blockchain right away. But the blockchain latency otherwise is not affected. And transactions that don't need fairness, so if I have a blockchain with only a subset of transactions that need fairness, they are passed through right away and they don't see any effect. And there's 3 factors that can generate the blocking, and that's essentially the blocking rule I mentioned. The transaction itself is blocked. It needs to be in the same block as one that is blocked, or I don't have the voting messages overtook each other, so I get out of sequence votes, and those I need to ignore for now because I need to have a complete picture on what came in what order. And if you look at the performance, we lose actually very little time. So the number of transactions that are blocked is essentially the ratio between the blockchain speed and the message transaction speed. So if my blockchain needs to send 15 messages to finalize a block, then 1/15 of all messages on average are blocked because of Wendy and then put into one later block. And I believe this is actually the optimum you can have for a fairness protocol, but I haven't formally proved that yet. Next, if you go on integration sorts. So again, Wendy is meant to be a pre-protocol that is supposed to run on an existing blockchain with absolute minimum impact onto that blockchain. So the one thing we absolutely need is that transactions are caught by Wendy and then maybe delayed for the blockchain or not. That's the only thing that's mandatory. Everything else, it's optional, but very, very helpful if we have that. So it would be very good if we had access to the point-to-point communication and authentication layer of the blockchain. If we use the same validators, then it would be stupid if we write our own communication library and our own authentication. So if that library is open for Wendy to send messages on, that would be very nice. Mempool prioritization is probably the biggest thing that we would like to have for Wendy. And that essentially means that if we put blocks into the mempool, then the underlying blockchain doesn't just mix them and put them in any order. But if you say this needs to be a group that needs to go together and that group needs to go before this group, that the blockchain actually respects that, which is pretty doable to implement, but it has to be done on the side of the blockchain. Otherwise, we end up with transactions we need to delay afterwards and wait, and then things get messy. Block validation. Wendy has its own opinion on when a block is invalid. So if a leader is corrupt and tries to send things out of order, that is easily detectable because they need to round up signatures, which they then can, but that has to be done somewhere. And we need some block post-processing to then do the internal sorting and also then communicate with Wendy and say, you can now ignore these transactions from now on they are now gone. So this is the 3 points where it would be helpful to have the right interfaces and support from the underlying blockchain. Everything else, we don't really care. There's a couple of more challenges. So we need a fixed and moderately sized set of validators. We have this for the setting that we are envisioning for Vega. If I want to run Wendy on Ethereum, then I probably need to find a solution like Casper that I have a subset of validators that run the fairness, and the whole set runs the blockchain. Mempool communication I mentioned. If I have a non-finalizing blockchain, so if I have a longest chain blockchain, then I need some sort of rewind function that Wendy can actually go back a couple of steps if the blockchain is rewound. It's mainly a storage issue that also Wendy then at some point needs to decide, I can now forget about this transaction and all the metadata because we won't get rewound here anymore. So I think it's more a theoretical problem, but in theory, something like Bitcoin and Ethereum 1 can be rewound by any number of transactions. And so Wendy would need some way to handle this. And the other thing which comes with things like Ethereum integration with the validator payment. So we want to avoid a setting where my transaction needs to come first due to the fairness rules, but I refuse to pay any gas. So I'm freeloading on other people that need to wait for my transaction and want to push things forward and thus need to pay gas. So the whole payment scheme interaction needs to be a little bit thought through. And causal orders. So I think causal order or threshold encrypted transactions is a very nice tool to work together. Wendy can really help there because now I can open up the encryption once by fairness I cannot be front run anymore, rather than waiting until I'm scheduled in a block and then needing to wait at least one block until I see the decryption. But that also needs to be integrated. I don't know if there are actually schemes out there already that are freely implemented, but it would be nice to have both working nicely together. And yeah, summing up, so fairness brings its own impossibility results, as so many other things in this world. It's all about circumventing impossibility results. We can support multiple concepts in fairness to adapt to market needs. We are lightweight. We have one additional message round, can go down to order of n communication complexity and have a very low latency impact. We have a prototype simulator implementation. The next step would be to put it on an actual blockchain, so that hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of devils in the details in the actual implementation, which is to be expected, especially if you name your protocol after a witch that is best friend with the devil. And there's a lot of fun research still to do. We can have more policies on the post-processing. I would love to have an additional model for selfish validators. We can actually tolerate a much stronger attack model than we have modeled, but we don't know how to model if I have a selfish validator who tries to steal stuff and doesn't collaborate with others. And my favorite question is guys that currently make money on front running are probably not saying it was a good time and now I become a gardener, but they will try to find another solution. So where will the Flash Boys go next if we have this implemented? And how can we be there first? Preferable with countermeasures and not by joining them. Okay, that is all. There's a couple of resources that I put on here, white paper, the code of the protocol, a Q&A I gave, and a non-technical summary. And I think I need to stop sharing if I want to see any questions now. So are there any more questions? Does Vega do any geo-blocking? And if not, are we worried about enforcement action by CFTC? What's CFTC? I'm not a financial guy. I'm a computer guy. But right now, we don't have geo-blocking to the best of my knowledge. There's yeah, there's a totally other sort of trying to geographically distribute validators and promote ones that are at rare places, but that's probably a totally different question. The rest of the question you really need to ask our legal guys. My understanding is that building and running are very different things, but there's very bad things that happened if computer scientists try to answer legal questions. So if you send me an email, I can forward it to someone who can give you more appropriate answers. So I don't think we are worried, at least I'm not, but I don't want to go into legal things. Are fraud proofs still possible? I'm not sure we're talking about the same things of fraud proofs. If it's proofs or that validators try to cheat, some of them are still possible. Others, the fraud just doesn't appear. But if you can specify more what you mean with fraud proof. Does Wendy require more data and consensus? So it would delay time to. So the block order protocol doesn't need any more data. All we need there is that Wendy needs to know the order of things, and then the consensus protocol. That's what I meant with integration into the mempool. Wendy will give blocks to the consensus layer and say, please put this block together. Or please put these transactions together in a block and before that one. So this is meta information that is added that would be nice if the mempool could support this. Otherwise, the consensus layer itself doesn't need any more data. So most of the things, and also if we do timing things, that is all happening before the BFT protocol is ever touched. And the proof, that's the other point, that is signatures that I ordered things correctly. So this is then in the block validation, which we can do as part of the blockchain. We can also do it if we need to on a transaction layer. So after the blockchain finalized a block, the application can say, well, that block didn't satisfy fairness, so some validator here was bad, but it would be nicer if that would happen on the if we could integrate this into the blockchain. Well, the validator cannot pick a random order for transactions anymore because the validator needs to use an order that is defined by the input from all the other validators, which is signed. So all the transactions that are subject to the fairness, I don't need a fraud proof anymore because fraud is impossible. You would need to forge signatures to have a valid block with a fraudulent order.
Hey, Klaus, we need to wrap up now.
Okay.
We're slightly over.
Well, I think we also ran out of questions. So thanks, everybody. Sorry for the noise at the beginning. And well, you know where to find us.
Awesome. Thanks for the great talk.